Alrighty, today we're going to be discussing multiplying and dividing integers. So, open up your books. We're going to say multiplying and dividing integers. Alrighty, now you're going to turn to after we talked about adding and subtracting integers yesterday, and so here we are today. Okay, multiplying and dividing integers. Alrighty, so many of you are already familiar with multiplying and dividing integers. We're going to work with 2 times 4. 2 times 4. Now we know that 2 times 4 equals 8. But we also know that 4 times 2 equals 8. So what that means is we're going back to our commutative property. The commutative property says it doesn't matter which order we put them. It is the answer. All right. Now we're going to throw an integer in it at you. We're going to say negative 2 times 4. What does that equal? Well, negative 2, we know that 2 times 4 is 8. But we got negative 2. So I'm going to have negative 2 right there. But when we say times 4, we're saying that I have 4 sets of these negative 2's. So that is 1, 2, 3, 4 sets. So that leaves me with what? Well, that leaves me with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I've got 8 of them, but 8 what? Notice they're on the red side, so that means they're negative, so that leaves me with negative 8. Now, when we reevaluate this, or we look at it, going back to our commutative property, I can say 4 times negative 2, and that still equals negative 8, because it doesn't matter which order we multiply it, we still get the same answer. But that also means that negative, so here we're saying negative times a positive, what does that equal? That gave us an answer of a negative. Over here I got a positive times a negative. What do I still get? I still get a negative. So we are 3/4 of a way to finding our answer. But there's a 4th step, and that says a negative times a negative equals a positive, and that's probably the most confusing thing I've ever heard. But let me help you explain. All right, we've got 2 here. Okay, I've got my 2. Now, the opposite, and we're going to say negative 2, and we know that these are opposite. Oh, here's this word again. I keep bringing it up. Opposite, opposite, opposite. Well, we know that the opposite of 2 is negative 2. So that this little negative, as we talked about the additive inverse, means opposite. So if I got negative 2 here, and I was put a negative on the outside of it, that would mean that the opposite, up here, the opposite of 2, we put a negative, that means it's the opposite of 2 is negative 2. So the opposite of negative 2, the opposite here, is positive 2. So the opposite of negative 2 is positive 2. So let's look at it this way. Let's say I say the opposite of 2 times negative 4 is what? Well, we already knew from up here that 2 times negative 4 is negative 8. But I got this negative sitting out here. What does that mean? That means the opposite of negative 8 is positive 8. Now let's take the parentheses out of it. Okay? No parentheses. What does that equal? Well, as we showed you up here, that a negative times a positive, a negative times a negative equals positive 8. Because we're saying the opposite of negative 2 times the opposite of 4 is positive 8. Alrighty. So, going through what we've just gone through, okay, I want us to make a little table here. We're going to say our rule that we have found so far is positive times a negative, or positive times a positive equals positive. As we are familiar with that, we've gone through learning it our whole lives. So, negative times a positive equals a negative, as we learned here. Negative times positive. But because of the commutative property, that also means 4 times negative 2. So positive times a negative equals a negative as well because of the commutative property. So, and as I showed you down here with these problems, we also know that a negative times a negative will give us a positive. Okay? This is our rule right here for multiplication. But let's look at division. In all honesty, that's dividing. Division. Same rules apply. Positive divided by a positive equals a positive. And a negative divided by a positive equals a negative. Positive divided by a negative equals a negative. And a negative divided by a negative, that will give you a positive. Okay, so this is our rules for division. Now, pay close attention. Binary operation. Operation. What am I saying by binary operation? What I'm saying by binary operation is this, is that you can only do two things at one time. Let's look at this problem. We're going to say negative 4, okay, times negative 2. That's negative 4 times negative 2 times negative 3. Okay, so that's negative 4 times negative 2 times negative 3. Now, we know that negative 4 times negative 2 gives us a positive 8. Okay, so positive 8, all right, times negative 3. Negative 3 times positive 8 gives us an answer of negative 24. Okay, so when we're looking at negative 24 here, I want you to understand what we said. Okay, negative the opposite of negative 24 is positive 24, and the opposite of positive 24 is negative 24. And that's how we're able to come up with that. You have to pay attention to your binary operations, because when you got 3 of them in a row here, you've got a 2 at a time, 2 at a time. And that's going to give you, when you got a negative times a negative times a negative, it's not going to be a positive, it's going to be a negative. So just pay close attention to that. Binary operation, do 2 of them at a time. Otherwise, you're probably going to end up with the wrong answer.